Chapter 4 talks a lot about population ecology, evolution, and growth. So it's important to understand population growth and why that is also a hot topic in today, because we'll look at some of the environmental consequences of population growth. So we will need to understand what population growth is. The first example talks about when the Europeans brought their rabbit to Australia and how the rabbits just quite literally leapt out of control and took over everything. This is also a look at how a butterfly changed with over time and how it grew to kind of, its wings were smaller over time. So because things can change or evolve over time and really from generation to generation, we need to talk a little bit about cells, which is the fundamental unit of life. Prokaryotic cells are simple cells, and eukaryotic plant and animal cells are what we're made of, are more complex cells. This is a great video which talks about eukaryotic cells. I would encourage you guys to watch that. It's about 6 minutes long. I show it in all my biology classes. Energy transformations, you should understand what photosynthesis is, the inputs and outputs of photosynthesis. Cellular respiration is basically what all of our cells use. When you eat a bite of food, that bite of food gets broken down into glucose, and glucose gets changed into energy. It releases carbon dioxide and water as waste, which is what we breathe out, but we all need to go through cellular respiration to get energy. Anaerobic respiration works without oxygen, and it will yield less energy. Asexual and sexual reproduction, I'll let you guys read through that and what the differences are. Obviously, sexual reproduction can get a wide variety of genetic differences in offspring, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. We're all different from our siblings, our cousins. None of us are alike, so genetic differences. Mutations, and which gives us the diversity, are changes in DNA. Phenotypes are how an organism looks and functions, and this is a look at how flowers of the same species can have different phenotypes. Patterns of growth can be exponential, arithmetic, and population growth rate talks about the percentage of change and doubling time. You should be familiar with exponential growth. It's a J-shaped curve. Population growth rate, the growth rate equals the births plus immigration into a society minus the deaths and the immigration, which is out of the population. Here's doubling time, which is the amount of time it takes for the population to double over time. And the population growth rate is on the left side, and you can see the different species are here. Bacteria doubles extremely quickly. Elephants do not. Humans are down there as well, but wolves, rats, yikes, insects, and then bacteria and protists double extremely more quickly. Patterns of growth you should be familiar with, as they're seen here. Exponential growth rate, this is a case study of birds released in New York City, and then over the course of 10 years, tens of thousands of birds. Really, over the course of 100 years, they were all over the United States once they were released from New York City. So just showing how populations can grow, increase in number, and also spread out very quickly. Survivorship is the probability of an organism dying during a particular individual. Species survivorships vary widely. The starling versus the bald eagle. So if we talk about survivorship in terms of 3 types, type 1 survivorship, the most die old. So humans are an example of type 1 survivorship. Most of us will die old unless we get into an accident or have a disease. Type 2 survivorship affects species where the young and old die equally. And type 3 survivorship is where most die young. So fish are type 3, most will die young. Type 2 are birds in the middle. We are type 1, most of us will die when we're old. Fertility rate is the rate of reproduction. This changes with age. Age-specific fertility rates are where the offspring produced at age ranges. And the total fertility rate is the potential number of offspring. And you should be familiar with these as well. Populations cannot grow forever, and their limit to growth we call the carrying capacity. And this is your second, this might have to do a little bit with your second course assignment when we talk more about population growth. The carrying capacity is the number of organisms the environment can support, and this results in a logistic growth curve, which is an S-shaped curve. So exponential growth rate would be if the growth of an organism or population continues forever, but it cannot continue forever because the carrying capacity is the amount of resources that the environment has to support the population. And the carrying capacity is right here, and logistic growth would all be below that. Alternative patterns of population growth, some exceed carrying capacity, some can shoot past carrying capacity, but then they would crash because ultimately the environment would not be able to support an endless number of rabbits or insects. Other limits on population growth can be temperature, space, chemicals, nutrients. This is a look at how different fish survive in different temperatures. There's a range of tolerance for various factors. The habitat, the ecological niche is the role an organism fills. Species will evolve through adaptation and natural selection. These are the Galapagos Islands, which was kind of the head start for Charles Darwin's studies on evolution. And I'll let you guys read through that in these sections. Source of natural variations can happen from generation to generation through mutations, which are chance changes in DNA. These can be influenced from the environment, like UV radiation, chemicals, or pollution. And this influenced the beak length in Charles Darwin's finches. 3 types of natural selection can be directional, stabilizing, or disruptive. Species are organisms that can breed and produce fertile offspring. New species, reproductive isolation, their breeding barriers can be geographic, like mountains or rivers, or temporal. Their breeding seasons will only happen at a certain time. So the northern spotted owl and the barred owl will never really interbreed because they're located in 2 geographic differences, and it would be hard for them to cross the Rocky Mountains. So that's a geographic barrier to their breeding. This is a temporal breeding barrier between these frogs and why they would never interbreed, because their cycle or breeding patterns are only during certain parts of the year. New species can develop, and possibly the reproductive isolations, there's behavioral and structural incompatibilities. There are also courtship rituals. These males, birds are actually doing some sort of dance to try to attract the other gender. These are hummingbirds, obviously being attracted to a certain type of flower for pollinating. This is a mixed species between a lion and a tiger. So this can occur where you could breed between species. This is called a liger between a lion and a tiger, but most often when this occurs, it creates species that are unable to reproduce. So this liger would not be reproductively capable of producing itself on its own. That's the end of chapter 4. I know these were quick lecture videos, but that was to encourage you guys to try to watch as much as possible, work through the instructor guided notes and the end of chapter questions on your own to kind of supplement learning of this material as well. Hope you guys are doing well. This is the end of this unit, this module. You should be preparing for your first lecture exam.